Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Hamlee. What happened to tennis star Serena Williams after the birth of her daughter happens to thousands of African American women during and after childbirth. The fight for proper health care to overcome a pregnancy-related challenge. Despite education, income, or socioeconomic status, African American women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than their white counterparts. Why is that? And what can Black women do about it? That's the topic of today's Another View on Health. Stay tuned. Another View will be right back.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Hamlee. Today on Another View on Health, we dive deeply into the issue of preventable pregnancy-related complications that may lead to death in Black women. And you'd be surprised at some of the issues that may cause some of these complications to happen. That'll be an interesting conversation. But first, let me invite you to our next Race Let's Talk About It conversation. This time we are exploring, that's a new word. This time we are exploring our differences and commonalities through song. And you will be amazed at some of the songs that we sing gleefully, but if you examine the lyrics, you will see the embedded racism. This town hall will have performances by Teddy Holmes and Sibel Galindez, and I will moderate the conversation with you, our audience. This is happening on Saturday, March 2nd from 1 until 4 at the Ziders American Dream Theater in Virginia Beach. It's free, but we need you to register. Please go to whro.org/events to sign up. So even when you control for age, education, and socioeconomic status, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related complication than white women. Why? Health officials say there are several factors: lack of insurance, obesity, diabetes, and hypertension in the mother prior to pregnancy, and sadly, racism. Some health experts argue that hospitals with a history of segregation provide lower quality of care for Black mothers. So what do we do about this? Joining us to talk about being Black and pregnant is OBGYN Dr. Khadijah Jordan. Hi, Khadijah. Welcome back.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much.
We're so glad to have you. Mekbib Gemeda, who is Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion with Eastern Virginia Medical School. How are you?
Thank you. Very good. Thank you.
And so happy to finally get you on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Dr. Kimberly Adams Tufts, Professor of Nursing at Old Dominion University. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank
today.
you. And they're so glad to have you on the show, too. And normally my co-host, Dr. Keith Newby, cardiologist, would be with me, but he has embarked upon a rather difficult case working this morning, and he's with his patient where he belongs. So we are happy that he is doing that. And Keith, we'll see you next month. No problem at all. So before we start our conversation about being Black and pregnant and what that means in terms of maternal lifespan as well as infant lifespan for that matter. Mekbib, I want to go to you because you are at EVMS, and we all know that recently EVMS has been in the headlines maybe in a way that you didn't particularly want to be, but with the yearbook from Governor Ralph Northam with blackface. And I know that EVMS is doing a lot of internal investigations and so forth. Can you tell us anything about what's going on?
Yes. As you know, these have been very difficult days for us. Very painful days in looking at the images and what they represent to us and to our students, our EVMS community, our external community, the patients, and the community we serve. So it has been very difficult, and we have quickly engaged in looking at the issue. We have established a community advisory board as well as legal experts to look into what are the issues involved that created that to happen, and then also to look at what is the culture at the moment. And the most important thing as we encountered that was the anxiety and pain that our community and particularly our students were going through, and so we have quickly started conversations internally immediately to get their voices and their pain and their conversations out. And we will have a transparent process in which we will be looking at the culture. And my belief is that we have been doing quite a lot of work to actually look at health equity and how we serve our community better. And this process will help us accelerate some of the efforts that we had in place over these past years. And so we are very thankful of the support that we've been getting from a lot of people around who recognize, and our alums as well, who recognize the work that we do, and where we are in principle in going forward in addressing inequities that we unfortunately face in this country today, all over the place. And those are the things that we have to be transparent and honest about, and really go forward in being the good providers that we want to be, and in training future physicians who are going to be good caregivers.
Well, I have to tell you, from two of our most recent shows, today's show and last month's show, were outgrowths of your EVMS magazine.
Yes.
And I noticed that you were focusing on issues that really affect African Americans. We talked about last month about the shortage of doctors.
Yes.
And had a very robust discussion about that. And then today's cover is When Childbirth is Deadly. I had been following this childbirth issue all along, but then when I saw this too, I said, maybe now is the time for us to do this topic and to talk about it.
Yes.
So you will be reporting out, EVMS will be reporting out as things change and as you conclude your investigation.
Absolutely.
On this.
We'll be talking with everybody and reporting out as the reports come, and discussing about what we're doing and what we'll be doing in the future to advance the work that we have started.
Okay. All right. So, Black women and having babies, and the numbers are astounding. I mean, when you think about the fact that 3 to 4 times greater risk of death of a Black mother having a child or having a complication around either the childbirth or the year afterwards. Is that correct, Khadijah, in terms of how they describe?
Actually, maternal mortality is usually within 42 days after giving birth. So within 6 weeks.
Okay. And when you look at when you get a patient in who is African American, are there different things that you look for in terms of treatment, or in terms of making sure you're testing for? Is this something that is inherent in Black women, or does it have to do with something else?
Well, as we know, there are risk factors for different things in different populations. For example, genetic defects you may see more in Ashkenazi Jewish populations, and hypertension, sickle cell you may see in African Americans. And so there are risk factors, but I think actually treating everyone the same is important. And by that I mean not exactly like a cookie cutter, but being conservative, listening to your patient, acting and testing if they complain of something, instead of just, my word to patients is poo-pooing it. We want to address it. And at least then we can just take a deep breath if everything is normal. Now, of course, that's maybe costly to the patient.
In what way? What do you mean?
Money, finances, testing. Testing isn't free. So I'm hoping that this conversation will start other conversations, and that EVMS will be a template for all schools, universities in this country, but even insurers, as we talk about money. I mean, because that's what a lot of everything comes down to, is money. Do we have monies for more studies? One of the studies, I was talking to Amy Paulson, who was participating in this EVMS study, and I told her, actually, and Dr. Porsche, Leah Porsche, she's quoted in the article as well, that to drill down, it would be great to find even more statistics on same race providers to the same race of patient, and to see
to see
what
if there's a
those
difference.
statistics are. Yes.
So, Kimberly, there was found. Well, let's take Serena Williams' example as an example now, because the response that I got from people as we were talking about doing this show is that, oh, well, you're talking about poor women, because they don't get the proper, they don't see the doctor early enough, and they don't get the proper health care, and they can't afford it, and so forth. Serena Williams and Beyonce, as two examples, are definitely not in that category. They can afford the absolute best health care, and both of those women faced complications with their pregnancies. And Serena almost died. I mean, had to fight to get them to test for blood clots.
Yes. And so I thank you for this conversation, because therein lies the rub. And I would have to say to you that you talked about, are there some things you look for? Of course, there are risk factors, but there is no biologic basis for inherent differences in birth outcomes in women. And Dr. Jordan Khadijah talked about 42 days for maternal mortality, but we also want to speak about infant mortality, which is a death of a child before the age of 1. And therein lies the more so than maternal death. It's we should be ashamed, actually. And so, yes, I want to point the audience and you to a classic from 2003. It's called Unequal Treatment. Look it up. Institute of Medicine, National Academy of Science. It was put forth in our country, and it was probably the biggest push in the last 20 years, other than medical errors, of what we need to do in healthcare. And that's where we started to use the word health disparities. So, and speaking about that, let's think about language a little bit. So I teach in this area, I do research in this area, and I have to get students often to see the difference between a health disparity and a healthcare disparity. They are different, and it's not the same.
Okay, explain the difference.
At the same time, disparity, when we say disparity, we say it's a state of being unequal. So there's something up with these people. They're unequal. Okay? Their state is unequal. So when I teach, I've tried to move the needle a little bit, and I speak about health inequities. And that's not what the most progressive people use. But because we're not ready for the most progressive. So health disparity, there's something inherently different about them. Okay? It's a difference, a state of being unequal. Inequities, that brings in the thought of maybe it's about justice, whether it's more justice or decreased access to justice. Really, in more progressive countries, they speak about health inequalities. And they talk about these are differences in healthcare outcomes that are avoidable, unnecessary, and unjust. We don't use health inequalities in our country. They use it in the UK and in most of Europe and many other Asian nations. Okay? So we say that there's something up with these people. That's why this happens. And we often say, well, they don't have access, they don't have insurance, or they don't go to the doctor on time, or any of those sort of things. Honestly, I've known it for 20 years ago. A study was done in New York City, an ethnographic study, you know, when you go and live with the people and study them. And they looked at women in New York across all economic strata. So the women who lived in the brownstones in Harlem to the women who were in the tenements. And what did they discover? That they had the same kind of birth outcomes, meaning the babies died, the mommies got sick, and they had low birth weight babies, meaning babies are born too small. Why? Because some of them had the best insurance and the best education and lots of money. And what we discovered is that it's related to social determinants of health. And some of those, it can be education, or it can be access to insurance, those kind of things. It could be money. But when it's not, well, we discovered that it had something related to social state and what these women were experiencing. The women in the brownstones experienced the same thing as the women in the tenements. It was an underlying stress, and the stress was related to what we call in the science microaggressions. And what could that be in our country? What would you all say?
What would you call microaggressions, Mekbib?
Microaggressions are the very subtle ways that people experience stress over time. And those are discriminatory
discriminatory ways.
But that are subtle. and they're not felt directly, and we don't respond to them immediately. But over time, they have a burden that people carry internally. And in many of, some of the studies that were done, and particularly with the maternal health effects, we're looking at these issues that over time have, epigenetic, practically, outcomes. So because genetically we change over time as well as a result of environment. And so these are some of the things that
these women are under that much stress that ultimately it's moving into the genetics. Is that what we're saying?
In the reproductive sphere, yes, that is the case. And then those were studies that were done actually with that there were men's studies that relate to African Americans as well, that relate to the issues of hypertension and other stuff. That again, becomes an overtime stress-related response.
I want to read something to you all. This comes from the New York Times Magazine, and I just want to get your reaction to it. I'll get the reaction from each of you. But it says that the reasons for the black-white divide in both infant and maternal mortality have been debated by researchers and doctors for more than 2 decades. But recently, there's been a growing acceptance of what has largely been, for the medical establishment, a shocking idea. For black women in America, an inescapable atmosphere of societal and systemic racism can create a kind of toxic physiological stress, resulting in conditions including hypertension and preeclampsia that lead directly to higher rates of infant and maternal death, and that societal racism is further expressed in a pervasive, long-standing racial bias in healthcare, including the dismissal of legitimate concerns and symptoms that can explain poor birth outcomes, even in the case of black women with the most advantages. Khadijah.
That is correct. And that's what we've been talking about. And that's why it doesn't matter what socioeconomic status you are. You mentioned Serena, you mentioned Beyonce, remember Judge Hatchett, her daughter. She also had bleeding. And I just want to educate our listeners. The most common problems are the hemorrhage. That can be intraoperatively if you're having a scheduled cesarean section, or immediately after while you're in the hospital. And hospital stays can be 2 to 3 days. Years ago it may have been 5 weeks.
Yeah.
But it's 2 to 3 days. So you need close follow-up. Cardiovascular complications, cardiomyopathy. If you have difficulty breathing, don't just assume that it is normal. If you're not sure, go in and ask. It can be preeclampsia, which actually that's part of my story. And one of your producers, she knows that story well, Lisa Godley. I had preeclampsia. And my blood pressure was extremely
That's high blood pressure
elevated.
while you're pregnant.
That's correct. In addition to protein spilling in the urine, some other things, and edema or swelling. But my doctor didn't take me out of work. And so I kept working and working until, at a point, I decided I was going on bed rest. So just what we're talking about, and that's what I really want to educate the listeners, you have to speak up for yourself. If there's a concern, ask your primary OBGYN to have a maternal fetal medicine consultation. That's what we do in our practice. If we have a concern or the patient's high risk, and there's a varied definition of high risk. And different practices can handle different things. So for our high risk for our practice may not be high risk for someone else, or vice versa. For our practice, actually, high risk would be if you had a cardiac surgery when you were young. But we handle hypertension because with obesity, advanced maternal age. I just delivered someone 48 years old.
Wow.
Wasn't her first baby, but the first one was years ago. So we are older, and we are having these chronic conditions that you mentioned earlier that come with you into the pregnancy. And then there's embolism. You may have a pulmonary embolism like Serena, or a blood clot, and that's what that is. So I think you really have to be your own advocate. You have to speak up. You have to know, again, what your insurance will cover and what they won't, so you'll be in the know, because this is not, like we said, just low-income people. And actually, state of Virginia, they do very well, because patients, if they're pregnant and they can't afford the care, they have access to Medicaid. And in our practice, we do accept patients before that Medicaid actually goes through. Just when we know that that is a population that would be accepted, because, you have to get things early. You have to see them early.
Yeah.
So there are many women who are pregnant who are waiting for their insurance to come through before they go. So I would urge them to call around to different practices and see if they could even be seen earlier while they're waiting for their ID number.
Because it really is critical to be seen as early as possible.
Yes.
Once you become pregnant. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We're talking about being African American and pregnant. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. We would love to hear your experience and whether you felt that you were taken seriously as a patient as you went through the process. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Kimberly.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that we need to talk a little bit about the numbers, as it can be a very emotional topic. And, in the New York Times article, they talked about 243% Black women more likely to die from pregnancy-related issues. In the EVMS article, they talked about in Virginia it's 300% more likely. What does that mean? To me, I'm a person. I don't know what that means. But I would say to you that also the babies are dying. So in the United States, we have an infant mortality rate, meaning how many kids die before age 1 per 1,000 who are born. We have one of 5.8. It puts us behind 33 other countries that are comparable to ourselves. So we're almost last in infant mortality. 5.8 is good, though, because I remember when I started in this, we were 10-something. Okay?
Wow, so we were getting better.
Yeah, but still 33rd out of 35. Also, but for African Americans, it's still above 10 on a national average. 10 babies per 1,000 for African Americans. But let's take it to Virginia. So I looked up Planning District 20, which is Hampton Roads. And for us in Hampton Roads, it's about 8.9. Okay, so we're well above the national average. And I'll tell you, unfortunately, Virginia Beach is the best at 5.7. Portsmouth is 11. Suffolk is in the middle, and Norfolk is the highest at 14 babies dying per 1,000. But I thought, well, what does that mean, in Virginia? So I went up to the rich folks in Northern Virginia. I thought I just had to do this. So I went to Planning District number 8, which is Fairfax City and those, the like, Arlington. Well, for them, they're below the national average. They're 4.6. And in Fairfax City, it's 1 baby per 1,000. Well, I said, let me take it to the rural area where my folks came from. So I went to Western, to Planning District 12, which is Danville, Martinsville, and those kind, right? So it's even better still than our area. It's only, as a whole, 6.7. And there's some places like Pittsylvania County, where my folks came from. That's Alex Haley, the wall, plantation. It's 1.2. Because community is different and they have different access. So-and-so and she knows so-and-so, right? So think about it, though. We're really high in our area of Virginia compared to the nation and compared to our state.
So what is going on in Hampton Roads that's making this happen?
Well, there are different things you can point out, and it's really related to social determinants of health. The experience for me as a person being raised in New Jersey, but came to Virginia like it was around the corner on the weekend, and the difference that you see, and then being lived in other places in the South, in the Northeast, in the Midwest, and come to Hampton Roads, it's different. We're very localized here. We've got a really deeply entrenched culture.
I tell you, let's take a phone call real quick. Let's talk to Tempest in Newport News. Hi, Tempest. You're on the air.
Hello. How are y'all?
Doing good. How are you?
Good. Thank you.
Go ahead. You're on the air. Your question or comment?
Yes, my comment is that I was actually pregnant, and afterwards I had my baby, and at home I wasn't feeling well. My swelling didn't go down, and so I called my OBGYN, and she said to come in. And finally, I went to my OBGYN, and they immediately said, you need to go to the hospital. You need to go to the hospital right now. And I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? So I go to the hospital, And I'm there for like 2 or 3 hours just waiting. And then finally they come to me and they say, oh, my gosh, you have a blood clot. We're going to put you back upstairs. Something's going on. And after that, it was very weird because before then they never told me anything about this could happen to me, or I didn't have anything going on beforehand. So it was very crazy when I went back to the ER for 2 days. I got depressed because I couldn't see my baby. So I definitely can experience and understand what's going on with African American women, because at first it wasn't a problem, and then afterwards it was like out of nowhere, oh my gosh, this could happen to you, and then ultimately nothing was wrong. Ultimately, I was sitting in the hospital for a few days for no reason, but it is very scary when you go back for something and you realize, oh my God, this could be happening to me. What's going on? And it was just a crazy incident. And my baby's fine. I'm fine. But
good. That's what we wanted to know.
Oh yes, everything is great, but it was just the craziest thing because I'm the healthiest person. So yes, Tempest, it definitely is. Yes.
Let me let the group respond to you, and thanks so much for your call. I appreciate that. Let me ask you, Mekbib, what are you all teaching young doctors in terms of this whole idea of the treatment of patients and listening to the patient? Because you hear a lot of this of people saying, I don't feel well, or this doesn't feel right, and being in a more dismissive attitude. So what are you guys teaching?
So we are really doing, for the longest time, medical education had been very, very biomedical. So, with some kind of an assumption that this is just a science and neutral, that just, the physiology and whatever happens.
Give me the facts,
and
sir.
that's it, right? But however, we know for a fact that that is not true. That actually both health and illness happen in a whole context of social circumstances, and they are determined by them, 80% of them. And, depend whether you're stressed, or whether you have a job, or whether you have a good life, or whether you're eating, or whether, like all of the other things that affect you. And then that affect you over time as well, as we are talking about, right? Like over time. So therefore, what we are trying in our education right now, we're really flipping it, and we are starting their day of education, the first day of class, to think about social determinants, to think about the patient's story. That's what it is in the end. How is the patient coming here? What are they taking? Are they taking a bus? Are they walking? Are they, do they have children? All of those things are actually contexts of their lives and contexts of their illness, and how well they will be after, intervention, and how you can actually work with them to get them better, right? And so that is where we're thinking. The other side of it is the implicit biases that the everybody comes with, including then the provider, right? Including the physicians that we are training, because those implicit biases actually shape how you look your outside, how you look at that patient coming through the door. So therefore, you have to actually manage those implicit biases and clear them in order to see through that and get to the person, right?
So that's a whole nother area that you have to teach.
Exactly. So we're trying to actually make them sharp and aware and caring and humble and compassionate, to the degree where they can then be able to care, for somebody in real ways.
A lot of work to get through before you can even get to the caring part.
That's right.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about ways to prevent pregnancy-related deaths in Black women with OBGYN Dr. Khadijah Jordan, Mekbib Gemeda, Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion with EVMS, and Dr. Kimberly Adams Tufts, nursing professor at Old Dominion University. And my co-host, cardiologist Dr. Keith Newby, is out working with a patient. We are happy about that. Definitely. The phone lines are lit up, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Jeanette joins us from Chesapeake. Hi, Jeanette. You're on the air.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Just fine.
Good. What's your question or comment?
My comment is, it's not just when you're pregnant. As a black woman with MS, I find a problem sometimes when I go see doctors that are another color than I am. And
what do you experience? Can you tell us?
like all MS patients go through this instead of doing a test sometimes. It's not my neurologist, I lost my primary care doctor below, and I have not found one yet that I'm satisfied with. She listened to me. She's very caring to me, but they let her go because they felt like she was taking too long with her patients.
Okay, we can't really get into specific doctor issues, but I hear what you're saying in terms of that overall issue of insurance and what that causes, Khadijah, because you own your own practice, so I know that there is a time management issue that comes into that too. Jeanette, thank you for your call.
That's actually correct. So I wanted to hit on a couple of things. That was one of them. But childbirth is serious. When I read all of these articles, even dating back to 1985 when the United States first had a task force about this. So this is an age-long issue that childbirth seems to be such a people think it's automatic and there are no risks and there are no complications. So I think that education needs to be out there. And then I think that what she was just mentioning about the visits, yes, doctors are under a lot of pressure to see a certain number of patients in a certain amount of time just to meet the requirements, either from if they work for someone else or either to pay the bills. For our practice, we are not part of a large conglomerate. We are private owned, and we do think it's our patriotic duty to take care of, say, TRICARE patients. Yeah. But then we may have to double book them because we may not be reimbursed as well, just overall. So that is a problem. But I also wanted to mention it's not just the doctors. It's the full team. It's the nurses, it's the hospitals, and if I can just mention at Chesapeake General, we have protocols and safety bundles that we have in place that if a patient walks in the door hemorrhaging, boom, they know what to start doing. We also are the only hospital in the area that have board-certified OBGYNs in an OBGYN hospitalist program that I created in 2009. And those doctors are in the hospital for OB and GYN emergencies at night and weekends. So that's different from, even though in a training hospital you have a person, but an intern is not the same as a board-certified OBGYN that can stabilize that patient until her private doctor gets there. So our nurses, they go through drills. So I think that's also part of what should happen is we just need to have developed protocols throughout this country in all the hospitals so that if a patient makes a complaint on a floor after she's delivered, it should already stimulate some evaluation and not an assumption. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, just from what's been said earlier, is that not only do providers have our own, in each person, a judge, doctor, policeman, fireman, we have our own inherent bias just from our upbringing and our exposure. And that's something that should even start younger then. Why are we waiting till people are in graduate school
to start teaching, to talk about implicit bias and so forth?
And then sometimes we have an implicit bias and think that another color race may be better than my race of a professional. So I just wanted to throw those things out.
You threw out a lot.
Don't want to take all the time.
Kimberly, I want to come to you too. I wanted to ask you about the same question I asked Mekbib about nurses, because you train nurses, number one, and then secondly, I also want to talk about doulas because I want to make sure we bring that
let's
program.
Talk about some solutions, and not just about the problem. And I want to address the woman who just spoke and said it's not just in pregnancy, and she has, unfortunately, has MS. And what she hit on is something that's a thread throughout this. She talked about the listening ear. And one of my colleagues in nursing gave me some information this week. She's working in the maternal child area. Any program, Loving Steps, all of them that you can think of, 9 to 5. She's involved in them all. And she gave me 3 cases. They were all women of color. An African-American woman, a woman of Indian descent, and a woman who was Asian. And she talked about their experience in the healthcare system and how the thread was that they were seen as complaining and their concerns were poo-pooed. And she talked about the outcome for 2 of them, which wasn't so good, and that she accompanied, being a person of majority, accompanied the last one, the African American, to her visits and finally got some resolution for her, which is very interesting to me. And so we have solutions, and one of those listening ears is a doula. What is a doula? Doula is a birth companion. Some people say birth coach. Doula is the word that's been used. And it is a formal position a person can take in our country. Since about 1990, I think it might have been 95, we had DONA, Doulas International, where you can become certified as a doula. And so I am in the School of Nursing and being, I started though, and we all have bias. I started at Vanderbilt in a level 3 perinatal unit. So I know that pregnancy can have all kinds of risk, and it can. But there's also 90% of it that is a natural, normal process. And as a women's health nurse practitioner, I come from that perspective. And so when we think about a doula, and because maybe you don't have the time, or we don't have the time in the practice because of insurance and those kind of things, but you can have someone who's a listening ear. So what can a doula do? A doula is a birth companion who can join the family prenatally or antepartumly, before the birth, intrapartally, during the birth process, and postpartumly. And they are educated and trained. In some instances, it takes up a year. There's a didactic education, meaning they learn in the classroom in the theory, but there's also practical experience that takes part of it as part of the training. That's really important. So when we looked around and saw the infant mortality rates and the maternal mortality in our area, we said at ODU, what can we do? What's a solution? So Dr. Anita Feldman, who was former chair of Women's Studies, said, I've read all this stuff and it's just shameful to me. What can we do? And she started to educate herself. And with her vision and her drive, we started a program, and it's being led right now by the Department of Women's Studies. You know, Jennifer Fish, she's chair currently. But it's problem this complex takes more than one perspective. It takes more than a nursing perspective, a medical perspective. So we have folks working with us now, a couple of nursing folks, someone who's got a young African-American woman who's a doula, just got certified, who has a master's in public health. We have someone from the School of Public Services here at Old Dominion that's in the College of Business. We have someone who has a pediatric physical therapy background. And the Department of Women's Studies is providing scholarships to students on our campus who would like to become doulas. Thus far, last fall,
so
4 were trained.
Yeah, so and when they're trained, so tell us, like, do they go to the home? Give us a little sense of what happens. Yeah.
You know, they have classroom, the theory, and then they have to be supervised to attend birth with someone. One of the newly educated and trained doulas wrote Dr. Fish in January that over the Christmas break in Hampton Roads, in her church community, she acted as a doula for a family in her church community. And she talked about not only how she was that listening ear and that advocate and voice for the family to the medical profession, but how it was spirit lifting and a gift to her. She didn't realize that she would grow from it. So
what's the difference between a doula and I see you shaking your head over here, Mekbib. What's the difference between a doula and a midwife?
I don't think there is.
There is
a big difference.
Okay, what's the difference?
So in our country, we have certified nurse midwives who have a graduate degree. We also have in some states where you can be a midwife who does not have a nursing background but has years of education and training. It's not across the United States, it's just a few states. And a doula does not have to have any medical or nursing education or training.
So they're not actually catching the baby.
They are a birth attendant, and they can work postpartum to also help the mother learn to be better and learn better how to breastfeed and such. They can also do some small chores in certain communities.
Supportive.
It's very supportive.
Supportive
Yes.
role.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And this is, I
ahead.
think I just wanted to add, it looks similar to one service learning project that we have at
Okay.
EVMS.
Yes.
For students, actually, where students actually work. They're coaches, practically. For mothers.
For mothers.
Yeah, so they start early and they actually coach the mother through the process. So that's a fantastic way of
Doula
learning.
in Greek means woman's servant.
Yes.
So, okay. I get it now. Let's talk to Connie in Norfolk. Hi, Connie. You're on the air.
Hi.
Hi. You're on the air.
Yes. My concerns when I gave birth to my middle child was, as I was carrying her, the doctor suggested I take some type of syrupy concoction, I don't know what it was, to test diabetes, the possibility of diabetes. Of course, my question was, will this be harmful for my child? And the answer was no. And immediately after taking it, she just started doing somersaults. So I guess I was a little concerned how much of this is research in maybe even a form of birth control.
Maybe in a form of birth control. I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Maybe even a form of birth control. I mean,
okay.
if these babies are not living in the.
I see where you're going with that. Okay, Connie, thanks so much for the call. I don't think we want to go.
Well, I think what she was mentioning was the glucola.
Yeah.
And or GTT, and it's the standard of care in this country to test for diabetes. It's a screener between 24 and 28 weeks, and it's a 1-hour test. You come in, you drink a syrupy drink.
Oh, I've done that.
Which is really 50 grams of sugar. I mean, a couple of candy bars. So
Right.
right, and so the baby has
That
all
might
the
have been
sugar.
said. Yeah,
and
that's why the baby
does
was doing it.
somersaults,
Yeah.
right? And you look at the mother's response to that sugar.
Okay,
That load. And so that's what a glucola is.
Okay.
But there are alternatives, a jelly bean test or doing finger sticks without taking the glucola. So you have to be at a practice that you feel comfortable with, who listens to you. And in our practice, the one complaint if you go online is always that we take too long. Well, I'm sorry, I take too long, but we are very conservative and we listen to every patient.
Yeah. And you want to make sure that you're hearing. So
Remember that glucola is one soda. People are drinking soda day and night, and that's what a glucola is.
Absolutely. Let's see. Let's go to Elaine in Norfolk. Hi, Elaine. You're on the air.
Hi, yes. I'm Latina, ethnicity-wise, but my race is white, and I actually had a doula because my husband's in the military, and I loved the experience. My only problem with the doula aspect of it, she was amazing, and a lot of the decisions I made based on what she educated us on really affected every aspect of how I delivered, and it was a wonderful experience. But what I struggle with is how our insurance doesn't take it, and people who don't. For us, it was, we made it work, but it's not. It's totally worth the experience. And our doula was military, and she gave a discount. It was wonderful, but it's frustrating because a lot of people who could use that education and that support, it's not necessarily attainable. And so I wish insurances would take it and see the value, because I've read statistically women who have doulas tend to have less medical interventions, which cost less money. I think that's what I've read. So, but it's frustrating because it's not seen as something that's essential.
Elaine, you bring up a really, really good point, and all of our guests are shaking their heads. I'm going to give them a chance to respond because we're almost out of time. But thank you so much for that call. Kimberly.
Yes, absolutely. Having a doula reduces negative birth outcomes, improves emotional stability and family bonding, and we can go on and on. Unfortunately, it is not universally reimbursed for in our country, but some of the major insurers are starting to look at it. And at Old Dominion, with our doula service that we've just mounted, we're just a year into it now, second class will be trained. We will, that's volunteer, we'll provide the service free.
Oh, wow. How do people find out? If they want to
contact the Department of Women's Studies at Old Dominion University. They could also email me and I'll forward it on. Okay. Tufts, KTUFTS @ ODU.edu.
Okay. Oh, that is a wonderful thing. Now, is EVMS going to match that, Mekbib?
We don't have, but one thing that I just want to say globally is that there is much more a focus nationally to think about all these other aspects of social services that could be reimbursed, including, within Medicaid there are conversations whether other aspects of not direct clinical but that affect the social
support
determinants
Okay.
could count as a reimbursement area. So hopefully there would be some opportunities going forward that will see more holistic approaches to health.
So we have about 2 minutes left. I want each of you to give one major thing that you want women who are pregnant, thinking about becoming pregnant, or have just had a baby, to make sure that they remain healthy. And I'll start with you, Dr. Khadijah Jordan.
Really to start taking care of yourself either between or before pregnancy. You have to improve your health, especially if you're quote advanced maternal age, which I was quote advanced maternal age when I had my one daughter, and everything was fine. It ended up fine. But again, with communication, with my own self as a patient advocate, relying on your family, and then being honest with your practice or the physician, the provider. If you feel depressed, even during pregnancy, if you have a history, share the entire history and communicate.
That's Dr. Khadijah Jordan with the Jordan and Associates. Thank you so very much for being with us. We appreciate it. Mekbib?
I really have no more to add, but to say really health is a long-term thing. And so having birth starts a long time before actually conceiving. And so that is how we actually think about the generations. And so it's really good to think about reproduction and health way ahead of time and keeping healthy.
Okay, that is Mekbib Gemeda, Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion with Eastern Virginia Medical School, EVMS, as we know it. You get the last 30 seconds,
I agree
Kimberly.
with our fellow panelists. It starts before birth. See pregnancy as a healthy, wonderful thing that you can do, but do your research, and communicate.
And call the Women's Studies Department if you want a doula.
Yes.
Or if you'd like to be trained.
Well, and
Or is it
remember
only a
there are
student?
resources.
Okay.
Yes, if you'd like to be trained, but the scholarship is for students. But birth journeys with Jacqueline Starkey in our area, she will hook you up to become a doula.
Thank you. That's Dr. Kimberly Adams Tufts, Professor of Nursing at Old Dominion University, and we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Claude McKnight of the group Take 6, and you're listening to Another View.
There's a new sun rising. I can see a new horizon. You keep me realizing you're the biggest part of me.
Oh, you weren't supposed to catch me singing on mic. People returning to everyday life after spending years behind bars face their own struggles and challenges. And one of the most difficult is making sure they don't revert to the initial behavior that led to their incarceration. ODU's latest theatrical production, Getting Out, takes an up-close look at one woman's first day out of prison after spending almost a decade inside prison walls. And as our Lisa Godley discovered, this heartfelt drama is played out with an unusual twist.
70s music fills the Good Theater, setting the stage for the 1977 play Getting Out. The 12-member cast dances to the tunes, warming up for a storyline that's anything but lighthearted and fun. Getting Out explores the horrific events that have shaped the life of the play's main character, Arlene, a woman who has spent the last 8 years of her life behind bars.
I would have wrote, but I ain't had nothing to say and no money to send, so what's the use?
I made out.
They pay you for working?
About $3 a month.
And how you make it on $3 a month? You do favors?
You just can't make it on your own.
You play Olive?
You don't know nothing about that.
I hear things. Girls calling each other mommy, going to the canteens and picking things up for their husbands. That makes me sick, Olive. You got a family. I don't want nobody like that in my house.
You don't know what you're talking about.
I got kids at home. Don't need no bad example.
I can tell them some things.
Oh, yeah, like about the cab driver.
Look, that was a long time ago. I want to work now and make something of myself.
Director Carolina Conte describes Arlene as a woman struggling with her identity and haunted by her past.
What you see in this play, it's a woman who has been assaulted her entire life since childhood. So different moments prompt just different fears and traumas and terrors that have, been haunting her in the course of her life.
Arlene's character is played by two women. Asante Randall plays Arlie, the woman behind bars, while Josephine Hilt portrays the recently released Arlene. In most productions, Arlene is played by white actresses, including the 1994 TV movie version where Rebecca De Mornay has the starring role. But the ODU version has a different twist. Arlie is African American, while Arlene is white. I asked Ashanti Randall about preparing for her role as the angry, violent, and abused Arlie.
I just started thinking about, remember those times when you felt isolated and you felt like you were alone and no one knew what you were going through? That's what it must feel like to be in jail. So that kind of helped me. But I had to go to a couple dark places to get there, if that makes sense. But I'm okay. I'm good.
Josephine Hilt says it was wild getting into the mindset of a woman in prison.
I really feel her when she kind of wants to separate herself from her past, but then there's a lesson in her that I got to learn, in that you're always going to be you. It's what you used to do and what you do now, it's always you. And so I appreciate that about her, because it's that character has helped me to see that you just have to live with what you've done and try to be better or change or whatever you want to do.
After watching Arlene's horrific life experiences play out on stage, one question surfaces, which faces so many who re-enter society after spending time behind bars.
How can she do anything out of her life? That's, again, what applies, I guess, to our current society and just how much you can accomplish. And when you have had nothing, socially, financially, emotionally, you were deprived of everything. You were poor, you don't have an education, you were assaulted by your father, by your mother, by everybody who was around you. You don't have, never had any proper job, and you go to prison and then you get out. What are you going to do?
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
Wow, sounds incredible. Getting Out runs February 22nd through 23rd and February 27th through March 2nd at 7:30 p.m. at ODU's Good Theater. There's also a Sunday matinee at 2 p.m. on March 3rd. Now, tonight there's a panel discussion about challenges to reentry, and I am proud to moderate that discussion. So I hope that you'll join me tonight at 6 o'clock for that discussion. Thank you so much for listening and spending this hour with us. If you'd like to hear this show again or share it with a friend, visit our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. And while you're there, please sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. We're on Facebook, so like us, and I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Next week on Another View, how we celebrate racism through song. It's the topic of our next Race Let's Talk About It event, and we start the conversation on air next Friday. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer, and Jimmy Cooper answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Stay dry this weekend, everybody, and thank you so very much for listening to Another View.